Welcome to Grandpa's Gentle Sleep Stories. If tonight your mind feels a little too busy, a little too awake, you're in the right place. You don't need to quiet your thoughts. You don't need to sort them out. These stories are here to sit beside you while your thinking slowly runs out of steam. So get comfortable. There's nothing to figure out as the story begins. Night has arrived, even if your mind hasn't fully caught up to it yet. The room is quiet enough now, the kind of quiet that lets small sounds stretch out and fade on their own. The day has loosened its grip on the world outside, but inside your thoughts are still standing around, unsure where to go next. That's all right. There's no need to hurry them along. You're here now, resting where the day finally ends. Nothing else is being asked of you. The lights are dim or gone altogether, and the edges of the room have softened into shadow. The night doesn't mind if your mind is still awake. It has plenty of patience. Thoughts tend to do this sometimes. They keep moving even after everything else has slowed down. They replay moments that no longer exist, wander through conversations that ended hours ago, or pause on details that didn't seem important at the time. None of it needs your attention right now, but the mind hasn't quite realized that yet. So for the moment, you let the thinking be what it is. There's no effort required, no instruction to follow, just the quiet understanding that you don't need to participate in every thought that passes through. They can come and go on their own, like cars passing at a distance, their sound growing faint before disappearing altogether. The night has a way of holding things gently. It doesn't rush, and it doesn't insist. It simply settles in and waits. Even your thoughts will eventually notice that nothing is happening anymore. They may linger for a while, unsure what to do with the stillness, but they'll adjust. You might notice how your body feels now, heavier than it did earlier. Muscles that worked all day have finally been allowed to stop. The effort of holding yourself upright has ended. There's a quiet permission in that, an unspoken signal that it's safe to rest here. Breathing moves in and out without needing direction. Each breath arrives at its own pace and leaves just as easily. You don't need to slow it down or deepen it. The night will take care of that on its own, the way it always does. Thoughts continue to drift by, but they're already beginning to feel less sharp. They stretch out a little, losing their edges. A thought might start, then wander off before finishing itself. Another might arrive already half-formed, vague, and unimportant. That's a good sign, even if you don't need to notice it. The day is no longer asking anything of you. Whatever happened earlier can remain exactly where it is. There's no reason to revisit it, no benefit in rearranging it. Tonight isn't about improving anything or understanding it better. Tonight is simply here. The mind doesn't always like quiet at first. It fills the space out of habit, the way it always has. But habits soften when they're no longer needed. With nothing to respond to, thoughts begin to slow down on their own, one by one, without any effort from you. You might notice the way the room feels now, steady and unchanged. The walls aren't moving. The night outside the window isn't asking for attention. Everything is settled, even if your thoughts haven't fully followed yet. That's all right. There's time. The night stretches on without urgency. It doesn't have a schedule to keep. It doesn't care how long it takes for your mind to settle into it. You can stay exactly as you are for now, awake but resting, thinking without needing to reach any conclusions. Some thoughts may repeat themselves, circling back as if they've forgotten they've already passed through. You don't need to stop them. Repetition often means they're running out of energy. Each loop is a little quieter than the last, even if it doesn't feel that way yet. You're not required to listen closely. The story is here, simply to keep you company while the night does its work. You can pay attention when you want to, and let go when you don't. Nothing important will be missed. The darkness feels less empty now, more settled. It's the kind of darkness that holds rather than hides. The kind that makes space for rest instead of asking questions. Your body knows this feeling, even if your mind is still catching up. It recognizes the way the night lowers the volume on everything. It responds by sinking a little deeper, releasing the last bits of tension it's been holding without realizing it. Thoughts continue, but they no longer feel like they need answers. They appear, drift, and fade, sometimes before you've even noticed them fully. The night welcomes that softness. There's no clear line between being awake and beginning to rest. It's not something you need to cross deliberately. It happens slowly, in small, unnoticed moments. As the mind grows less interested in staying alert, the story doesn't need to go anywhere. It doesn't need to build toward anything. It's simply here, moving at the same gentle pace as the night itself. And as the room remains quiet and unchanged, as the darkness stays steady and calm, the thoughts that once felt so insistent begin to feel a little less certain of themselves, lingering for a moment longer before drifting onward, leaving just enough space for the night to settle in a little more deeply. And as the thinking continues to slow in its own unhurried way, some thoughts begin to return again and again, not because they matter, but because they're not quite ready to let go just yet. Not quite ready to let go just yet. Some thoughts have a way of coming back around. They don't arrive loudly, and they don't demand attention. They simply return quietly, as if checking to see whether anything has changed. Most of the time, nothing has. The room is still the same. The night is still calm, and you are still resting exactly where you are. These returning thoughts aren't here because they need solving. They circle because the mind hasn't fully slowed yet. It's what a thinking mind does when there's nothing left to think about. It revisits familiar paths, not out of necessity, but out of habit. A memory might drift back in, something small from earlier in the day. It doesn't arrive with any sharp feeling attached to it. It's more like an echo, softened by time and distance. You notice it for a moment, then it moves on, making room for the next thought that follows a similar path. Plans sometimes do the same thing. They appear briefly, already incomplete, then fade before reaching any conclusion. Tomorrow doesn't need your attention right now. The night doesn't concern itself with what comes next. It stays right here, holding the present moment gently. The mind doesn't always realize this at first. It keeps checking in, circling familiar ideas, returning to places it's already been. Each pass takes a little less effort than the one before. Each return feels slightly quieter, slightly less solid. You don't need to interrupt this process. You don't need to guide it or correct it. The thoughts know how to wear themselves out. All they need is time and a lack of resistance. The room remains unchanged as this happens. Shadows rest where they were before. The darkness doesn't shift or react. Everything outside your thoughts stays steady, offering no new information for the mind to latch onto. That steadiness matters. Without new input, the mind has nothing fresh to work with. It reuses old material instead, replaying it more slowly each time. Even repetition has a rhythm, and that rhythm begins to slow. Breathing continues without effort. In and out, quietly, steadily. There's no need to adjust it. The night has already set the pace dot as thoughts circle. They start to lose detail. Edges blur. The beginning of a thought may feel distant by the time it reaches the middle. Some thoughts don't even make it that far. They dissolve midway, leaving behind a vague sense of movement rather than meaning. This is how thinking changes when it's no longer being fed. It doesn't stop suddenly. It thins out. It stretches. It becomes less certain of itself. You may notice moments where there's a small gap between thoughts. Just a brief pause. It doesn't last long yet, but it's there. A quiet space where nothing is happening at all. Those pauses will return. Each time, they linger a little longer. The night doesn't mind these gaps. It welcomes them. It fills them softly, without asking for anything in return. Sometimes the same thought comes back again, almost identical to the last time. It may feel familiar, even boring. That's all right. Familiarity is a sign that it's losing its grip. New thoughts demand attention. Old ones tend to fade. You don't need to follow the path of any thought all the way through. You can let them circle on their own, like leaves moving slowly in a gentle current, turning over once or twice before drifting out of view. There's no expectation here, no requirement to stay alert. The story isn't building toward anything. It's simply here, steady and unhurried, keeping the night company while your thoughts gradually run out of things to say. The mind grows less invested in its own activity. Thoughts still appear, but they arrive without momentum. They don't pull you along with them. They pass through, leaving only a faint impression before they're gone. The longer this continues, the more natural it feels to let thoughts go unfinished. A sentence may start and trail off. An image may form and blur before becoming clear. None of it matters, and that realization settles in quietly. The night stretches out, wide and patient. It doesn't react to thinking. It doesn't reward it. It simply remains, offering the same calm stillness no matter how many times a thought circles back. Your body responds to this constancy. Muscles sink a little deeper. The weight of the day feels farther away now, less immediate. There's nothing left to hold up. Even the idea of paying attention begins to feel unnecessary. Listening becomes optional. You can drift in and out without losing anything important. Thoughts continue their slow loops, but they're growing softer with each turn. They seem less sure of why they're returning at all. Eventually, even repetition loses its purpose. Between one thought and the next, the quiet becomes more noticeable. It no longer feels empty. It feels settled, like a place the mind can rest without needing to explain itself. The night stays the same. The room stays the same. And within that steadiness, thinking begins to slow in a deeper way. No longer circling so tightly, no longer returning with the same insistence. As the mind starts to realize that it doesn't need to stay quite so awake anymore, and as the thoughts finally begin to loosen their loops, the day itself starts to feel farther away, settling quietly into the background, waiting without urgency to be remembered. Waiting without urgency to be remembered. The day no longer feels close now. It's still there, somewhere behind you, but it doesn't press forward the way it once did. Its sounds have softened, its colors dulled slightly, as if distance has already begun to do its work. You don't need to walk back through it. You can let it remain where it is. Moments from earlier may still appear from time to time. Not sharply, not in order. Just fragments, small pieces that drift up without asking to be placed anywhere. A glance, a sound, a brief exchange. They don't demand context. They don't ask to be improved or understood. The day doesn't mind being left unfinished. It has learned how to wait. You don't need to gather the pieces or line them up. You don't need to decide what mattered and what didn't. Everything that needed to happen has already happened. Everything else can stay just as it is, scattered gently across memory without needing attention. The night is wide enough to hold it all. Thoughts slow further now, not because they've disappeared, but because they've lost interest in moving quickly. They no longer rush from one idea to the next. They linger, pause, and sometimes stop altogether, as if unsure whether to continue. There is comfort in that uncertainty. The room feels especially still now. The air doesn't shift. Shadows remain where they've settled. Nothing outside the mind is asking for acknowledgement. It's easy to forget where one moment ends and the next begins. Breathing continues quietly, steady, and unremarkable. Each breath feels less noticeable than the one before. There's no reason to pay attention to it. And so it fades into the background, along with everything else. Memories of the day drift by in no particular order. They don't carry emotion so much as familiarity. They feel like places you've already left, seen again from a distance, softened by time even though only hours have passed. You don't need to say goodbye to the day. There's no closing ritual required. It can remain present without being active, like a book left open on a table, waiting patiently to be closed later. Nothing is being lost by letting it rest. Thoughts that once circled now move more slowly, sometimes stopping halfway through before gently fading. A sentence may begin without finishing. An image may blur before it fully forms. The mind seems less committed to completing anything. That's a natural shift. When there's no urgency, the mind learns it can let go. The night holds this pause comfortably. It doesn't try to fill it. It simply allows it to exist, quiet and unremarkable. Like the space between waves when the water lies flat, you may notice longer gaps now, moments when nothing comes forward at all. They don't feel empty. They feel settled, complete in their own way. There's nothing missing from them. The day rests in those gaps too. It sits quietly in the background, no longer replaying itself, no longer pushing details forward. It has found a place to stay for the night, somewhere out of the way, somewhere it won't be disturbed. Your body responds by sinking further into stillness. There's a sense of weight now, gentle and grounding. Muscles loosen without instruction. The effort of holding on has ended. Even the idea of effort feels distant. The story continues softly, but it doesn't move quickly. It doesn't introduce anything new. It stays with what's already here, allowing familiarity to do the work of calming. Listening becomes less focused. Words pass through without needing to be held. Meaning becomes less important than sound, rhythm, and the simple presence of a voice, moving steadily along. The night doesn't care whether you're following closely or drifting away. It remains patient either way. Thoughts may still return now and then, but they feel thinner, less defined. They arrive without context and leave without explanation. There's no need to trace where they came from or where they're going. They're simply passing through. The day continues to settle, its edges softening further. Details fade into broader impressions. What once felt specific now feels general, almost abstract. The mind no longer tries to sharpen it. There's a quiet relief in that letting go. The space around you feels unchanged, calm and steady. The same room, the same night, the same gentle stillness. Nothing has shifted, and nothing needs to. Time feels different now. Slower, less divided. Minutes stretch without being counted. The night doesn't mark its progress in any noticeable way. It just continues. Thoughts grow fewer and farther between. When they do appear, they lack momentum. They drift briefly, then dissolve, leaving behind only the soft awareness of the moment itself. You don't need to decide when rest begins. It has already started, quietly, without ceremony. It settles in gradually, almost unnoticed. The story doesn't signal a change. It doesn't point out what's happening. It simply stays present as the day finishes settling into its place, becoming part of the background rather than the foreground, and as the day grows more distant, no longer replaying or rearranging itself. The mind finds it easier to stay here, in this quieter space, where nothing needs to be remembered just yet, and as the day finally sits still where it belongs, the pace of thinking itself begins to change, slowing gently, as if it no longer needs to keep up with anything at all. Slowing gently, as if it no longer needs to keep up with anything at all. The pace of thinking feels different now. Not gone, just changed. Thoughts don't arrive with the same quickness they once did. They take their time, drifting in slowly, lingering briefly, then moving on without much insistence. There's less pressure to follow them, less reason to stay alert. The mind seems to notice that nothing is chasing it anymore, Ideas still appear, but they don't rush forward. They stretch out, taking longer to form, and sometimes they dissolve before becoming clear. A thought may begin as a vague sense rather than a sentence. Another might arrive already tired, lacking the energy to carry itself very far. This slowness feels natural. It doesn't need explanation. It's simply what happens when thinking no longer has somewhere to be. The night remains steady and unchanged, offering no new signals to react to. Without that stimulation, the mind eases back, settling into a slower rhythm. It no longer tries to fill every moment. It allows space to exist between thoughts without rushing to close the gaps. Those spaces grow wider now. You might notice that when a thought does appear, it doesn't hold your attention the way it used to. It passes through lightly, leaving only a faint impression behind. There's no pull to examine it or carry it forward. Letting it go feels effortless. The body mirrors this change. Muscles remain loose and heavy, comfortable in their stillness. There's no impulse to shift or adjust. Everything that needed to move has already done so. Breathing continues quietly, steady and unremarkable. Each breath blends into the next, forming a gentle, unbroken rhythm that doesn't ask to be noticed. The night seems to breathe along with you, slow and patient. The story moves at the same pace now. Words arrive unhurried, leaving space behind them. You don't need to hold on to any particular phrase. Listening becomes softer, less focused, as attention drifts naturally. The mind seems content to follow along loosely. Without commitment, thoughts that once felt sharp now feel rounded, softened around the edges. They don't cut into the quiet. They rest there briefly, then fade, leaving the calm undisturbed. There's a sense that effort has quietly stepped aside. You're no longer trying to rest. Rest is simply happening, gradually, without being directed. The night stretches on, wide and forgiving. It doesn't mark progress or demand awareness. It simply continues, offering the same calm stillness moment after moment. Time feels less defined now. Minutes don't stand out from one another. The mind stops keeping track, losing interest in measuring how long it has been or how long it might take. This unmeasured time feels easier to exist within. Thoughts grow fewer, and when they do appear, they feel lighter. They don't carry weight or urgency. They arrive without expectation and leave without consequence. Sometimes there's a pause long enough that it's noticeable, a stretch where nothing comes forward at all. These pauses don't feel empty. They feel full in a quiet way, like resting in a place where nothing needs to happen. The mind begins to settle into these spaces, finding them comfortable rather than unfamiliar. The room remains unchanged, offering no distraction. Darkness holds steady. Shadows stay where they are. Everything outside the mind remains, calm and predictable. This consistency makes it easier to let go. Thoughts no longer loop as tightly. They wander in wider, slower arcs, often losing interest before completing a full circle. Repetition fades as the mind realizes it doesn't need to keep checking the same places. Awareness itself feels softer now. You're still here, still present, but less defined. The edges of attention blur slightly. Focus becomes optional. The story doesn't require you to follow closely. It continues gently, providing a steady presence without asking anything in return. You can drift toward it or away from it without consequence. The body sinks further into rest. There's a sense of being supported, held in place without effort. The weight you feel is reassuring rather than heavy. Thoughts that do appear now feel distant, as though they're happening somewhere else. You're aware of them without being involved. They pass through like faint echoes rather than clear voices. This distance brings relief. The night deepens without announcement. There's no clear moment when things change. Everything simply grows quieter, slower, less defined. The mind no longer tries to organize itself. It allows disorder, unfinished ideas, half-formed impressions. None of it needs correction. Silence becomes easier to stay with. It no longer feels like something to be filled. It feels like a place to rest. Even the idea of listening begins to soften. Words pass through more gently now, sometimes blending together, sometimes fading before they fully register. Meaning gives way to rhythm, tone, and presence. The night holds this state patiently. It doesn't rush the process. It allows slowness to deepen naturally. Thoughts become more infrequent. When they do appear, they're quieter, less certain, and quicker to fade. The mind seems to be learning that it doesn't need to stay active to remain safe. Rest settles in further, spreading gradually without drawing attention to itself. The story continues at this unhurried pace, moving alongside the night rather than ahead of it. There's nothing new to introduce, nothing to build toward. Everything that's happening now is enough. And as thinking continues to slow, stretching out and softening, the mind begins to feel less interested in holding on to any single idea, allowing questions and thoughts to exist without needing answers at all. And in that ease, where thinking no longer insists on resolution, questions can simply rest where they are, waiting without any need to be answered. Waiting without any need to be answered. Questions still pass through the mind from time to time. They arrive quietly now, without the sharp edge they once carried. They don't demand attention. They don't insist on solutions. They simply appear, linger for a moment, and then drift away, leaving the quiet undisturbed. The mind seems to understand something it didn't earlier. It realizes that not every question needs an answer right now. Some can remain open without causing discomfort. Some can exist without being resolved. This realization settles in gently. Questions no longer pull you forward. They don't create momentum. They rest where they are, like stones placed beside a path rather than obstacles in the way. You can notice them without stopping to pick them up. The night welcomes this ease. It doesn't require clarity or certainty. It doesn't expect conclusions. It simply offers space, wide and patient, where things can remain unfinished without consequence. The room stays quiet and unchanged. Darkness holds steady. There's no signal urging the mind to stay alert, no sound that needs interpretation. Everything outside continues exactly as it was, calm and predictable. Without that stimulation, the mind relaxes further. Thoughts still form, but they feel incomplete by design. A question may arise without a follow-up. A curiosity may surface without direction. And instead of feeling unsettled by this, the mind allows it. Uncertainty becomes comfortable. There's a sense of permission in that. A quiet understanding that nothing bad happens when answers are postponed. That rest doesn't require resolution. That peace can exist alongside, not knowing. Breathing continues softly, unremarkable and steady. Each breath feels less distinct, blending smoothly into the next. The body remains heavy and supported, settled into stillness without effort. The story moves alongside this calm, unhurried, and gentle. Words arrive without urgency and leave without asking to be remembered. Listening becomes less deliberate, more passive. As attention drifts naturally, the mind no longer feels responsible for keeping track. Questions that once felt important now feel distant, almost abstract. They lose their shape before becoming clear. Some dissolve entirely, leaving behind only a vague impression that something had been there at all. There's relief in that fading. The night doesn't react. It doesn't shift or respond. It remains steady, offering the same quiet presence moment after moment. This consistency reassures the mind that nothing needs to be monitored. Thoughts slow further, not because they've been pushed away, but because they're no longer being fed. Without the need to answer or solve, they lose their energy. The gaps between thoughts grow wider now. Pauses stretch longer. Silence settles in without resistance. These pauses feel safe. You don't need to fill them. You don't need to wonder what should come next. The mind rests easily in these spaces, discovering that they're comfortable, even restorative. The body responds by sinking deeper into rest. There's a gentle weight throughout, a sense of being fully supported. Muscles remain loose, with no urge to move or adjust. Time feels less relevant now. There's no tracking of minutes or hours. The night unfolds without markers, without transitions that need to be noticed. The mind stops asking what comes next. Questions still exist somewhere, but they feel far away now, no longer close enough to engage. They've softened into background noise, barely audible, easily ignored. The story continues quietly, not leading, not instructing. It simply remains present, steady and calm, allowing the night to do what it does best. Awareness itself begins to blur slightly. You're still here, still resting, but less defined. The edges of attention soften. Focus loosens its grip. The idea of understanding feels unnecessary. Thoughts appear less often now, and when they do, they feel incomplete, as though they're content to remain unfinished. They don't ask for follow-up. They don't pull you back into thinking. This ease spreads gradually, without drawing attention to itself. The night deepens quietly. There's no announcement, no signal. Everything simply becomes a little slower, a little softer. Silence grows more comfortable. It no longer feels like an absence. It feels like a presence of its own, steady and reassuring. The mind rests in this silence, no longer scanning for problems, no longer searching for meaning. It allows things to be exactly as they are. The story remains gentle and unassuming. Words drift by like distant sounds, noticeable but unimportant. You don't need to hold on to them. You don't need to follow them closely. Listening becomes optional. Thoughts that do appear now feel thin, almost transparent. They pass through quickly, leaving little behind. There's no urge to examine them or bring them into focus. The mind seems content to let them go. This state feels natural, as though it's always been there, waiting beneath the surface activity. A place where questions don't press and answers aren't required. Rest settles in further, spreading quietly without effort. The body remains still. The night remains unchanged. Everything feels settled, even without clarity. And as the mind grows more comfortable with not knowing, with leaving questions unanswered, thinking itself begins to soften further, edges blurring as thoughts lose their need to arrive fully formed. And in that softness, where answers no longer matter, thoughts themselves begin to blur together, growing gentler around the edges as the night continues on. Growing gentler around the edges as the night continues on. Thoughts don't arrive the way they used to. They come in quietly now, without clear beginnings or endings. Instead of forming sharp outlines, they feel rounded, blurred, as if their edges have been smoothed away by time and quiet. It's harder to tell where one thought ends and the next begins, and that no longer matters. The mind doesn't try to separate them anymore. Ideas drift through slowly, overlapping slightly, blending together. A thought may appear halfway formed, already fading before it has a chance to settle. Another might follow close behind, not replacing it, just passing gently through the same space. There's no urgency in any of it. The night holds this softness easily. It doesn't require clarity. It doesn't demand structure. It allows things to exist without shape, without purpose, without needing to be named. You may notice that attention feels lighter now. It no longer lands firmly on any single idea. It drifts instead, moving loosely from one impression to the next, sometimes resting briefly, sometimes passing by without stopping at all. This drifting feels natural. The body remains still and heavy, supported without effort. There's no impulse to adjust or shift. Muscles stay relaxed, content to remain where they are. The sensation of rest deepens, spreading quietly without announcement. Breathing continues, soft and steady. Each breath blends into the next so smoothly that it's difficult to tell where one ends and another begins. The rhythm remains unbroken, calm and unobtrusive. Thoughts feel less like words now and more like impressions. A sense of something remembered, but not clearly. A vague image without detail. A feeling without explanation. They pass through without needing interpretation. The mind seems comfortable with this lack of definition. Silence becomes more noticeable, not as an absence, but as a gentle presence that fills the spaces between thoughts. It doesn't interrupt. It supports. It gives the mind somewhere to rest. The story continues at the same unhurried pace, its presence steady but unobtrusive. Words arrive softly and leave just as easily. You don't need to hold on to any particular phrase. Meaning becomes secondary to rhythm and tone. Listening drifts in and out naturally. Time feels increasingly irrelevant. There's no sense of how long you've been here or how long you'll remain. The night unfolds without markers, without transitions that need to be observed. Thoughts thin out further now. When they do appear, they're faint, almost transparent. They pass through quickly, leaving little behind. There's no urge to follow them or bring them into focus. The mind rests in this softness. Even the idea of thinking feels distant. Awareness itself seems to float, unanchored, moving gently without direction. There's no effort involved in staying here. Nothing needs to be maintained, that the room remains unchanged. Darkness holds steady. Shadows stay where they are. Everything outside the mind continues calmly, offering no distraction. This consistency allows the softness to deepen. Thoughts lose their individuality. Instead of distinct ideas, there's a general sense of mental movement, slow and diffuse. Like clouds blending into one another, forming and dissolving without sharp boundaries. There's comfort in this blending. The mind no longer feels the need to organize or separate. It allows impressions to overlap freely. Nothing is being sorted. Nothing is being resolved. The night doesn't interfere. The body sinks further into rest, weight settling evenly. There's a sense of being held in place, supported completely. The effort of staying aware feels unnecessary. Now words from the story begin to blur slightly, their edges softening just like the thoughts. Some phrases register only as sound. Others pass by without forming meaning at all. That's perfectly fine. Listening has become optional. Thoughts continue to soften, growing quieter and less defined. They no longer announce themselves. They arrive and fade without leaving a trace. The mind seems content to let this happen. There are longer stretches now where nothing appears at all. These spaces feel smooth and uninterrupted. They don't call attention to themselves. They simply exist, calm and complete. The night feels deeper here, not darker, but quieter. It settles around everything, cushioning thoughts, smoothing sensations, slowing movement until almost nothing remains. The story continues gently, not moving toward anything, not building or resolving. It stays with the night, matching its pace, offering quiet companionship. Awareness floats lightly within this calm. There's no clear boundary between thinking and resting now. The two begin to blend together, becoming indistinguishable. Thoughts feel distant, as though they're happening somewhere else, far away. You're aware of them only faintly, if at all. The body remains still. Breathing remains steady. Everything continues without needing guidance. This softness feels stable, unchanging. There's no sense of needing to move on or do anything differently. The mind rests comfortably within this blurred state. Silence feels fuller now, wrapping gently around what little remains of thinking. It doesn't push thoughts away. It simply outlasts them. The night stays patient. Thoughts become rare. When they do appear, they're faint and fleeting, dissolving almost as soon as they're noticed. There's no interest in holding on to them. Rest deepens quietly. The story remains present, but distant, like a sound heard from another room. You don't need to follow it closely. It will continue whether you listen or not. Everything feels settled, softened, and slow, and as thoughts continue to lose their shape and definition, blending gently into the quiet, attention itself begins to drift even more freely, moving without direction as the night carries on. And in that drifting, where thoughts no longer hold their form, the mind begins to wander without noticing, moving gently toward a place where awareness itself can begin to fade. Moving gently toward a place where awareness itself can begin to fade. The mind doesn't seem as present as it was before. Not gone, just less anchored. Awareness feels lighter now, as if it no longer needs to stay in one place. It drifts easily, without intention, without needing to decide where to go next. Thoughts still exist somewhere, but they arrive quietly, often passing through before they're noticed. A hint of an idea, a trace of a feeling, then nothing at all. There's no effort involved in letting them go. They simply don't stay long enough to matter. This drifting feels natural, almost familiar. Attention no longer settles firmly on anything. It moves gently instead, floating from one sensation to another, sometimes resting briefly, sometimes slipping past without stopping. There's no need to follow its movement. It knows where to go on its own. The body remains still and heavy, fully supported. There's no urge to adjust or check how it feels. Sensations blend together, becoming less distinct, less demanding. Comfort no longer requires awareness. Breathing continues softly, barely noticeable now. The rhythm remains steady, but it no longer draws attention. It's simply there, happening on its own. Like everything else, the room stays quiet and unchanged. Darkness holds steady. Shadows remain where they were, no longer registering as separate shapes. Everything outside the mind feels distant, as though it exists somewhere else entirely. The story continues, but it feels farther away now. Words arrive gently, sometimes registering only as sound, sometimes not at all. Meaning fades into rhythm. Listening becomes something that happens in the background, without effort. You don't need to keep track. The mind wanders freely, no longer guided by thought or intention. It drifts the way it always does when there's nothing left to hold on to. There's no destination. There's no expectation of arriving anywhere. This wandering feels safe. Time becomes difficult to sense. Moments stretch and overlap. There's no clear separation between one instant and the next. The night unfolds without markers, without change that needs to be noticed. Thoughts grow even rarer now. When one does appear, it feels distant, as though it's happening far away. It dissolves before becoming clear, leaving behind only a faint impression that quickly fades. Awareness itself begins to blur. There's less distinction between listening and not listening, between being aware and simply resting. The edges soften further, making it hard to tell where one state ends and another begins. The night seems to carry everything now, including awareness. You don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to guide it. It drifts comfortably on its own. The body remains deeply at rest. Weight feels evenly distributed, supported without effort. Muscles stay loose, unmoving. There's no signal to adjust or respond. Even the idea of staying awake feels distant. Silence fills the spaces easily. It no longer feels like something between thoughts. It feels like the natural state, steady and complete. Thoughts, when they appear, feel like brief interruptions rather than the main event. The story remains present, but far away, like a familiar sound heard from another room. You don't need to follow it. It continues whether you're aware of it or not. Awareness drifts further now, slipping in and out gently. There may be moments when it fades entirely, returning briefly without announcement. These shifts feel unimportant, barely noticed. The mind doesn't comment on them. There's no sense of effort or intention left. Everything happens quietly, automatically. Rest deepens without drawing attention to itself. Thoughts no longer form clearly enough to follow. They appear as soft impressions, vague movements that dissolve almost immediately. There's no interest in holding on to them. The night deepens around this drifting, not darker, just quieter. Everything slows further, settling into an even gentler rhythm. The body remains still. Breathing remains steady. Nothing changes, and nothing needs to. Awareness continues to loosen, floating freely without anchor or direction. It moves the way it always has when sleep begins to approach, lightly and without resistance. Listening fades in importance. Words pass through unnoticed. Sound blends into silence. Presence becomes diffuse. There's no clear moment when anything shifts. Everything simply grows softer, slower, less defined. The mind no longer tries to make sense of what's happening. It doesn't need to. It rests comfortably in this wandering state, where nothing requires attention. Thoughts are now rare and fleeting. When they appear, they feel thin and distant, barely forming before dissolving again. They leave no trace behind. Awareness drifts further still. The night holds this gently, offering the same quiet support it has all along. There's no urgency, no expectation. Everything unfolds at its own pace. The story remains, but it feels increasingly remote. You may notice it occasionally, or not at all. Either way is fine. The mind wanders without noticing, slipping easily between awareness and rest. There's no need to hold on to the present moment. It will be there whether you attend to it or not. This drifting feels complete, settled. There's nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. And as awareness continues to wander freely, becoming lighter and less defined, it begins to feel natural to let even this gentle drifting fade, allowing the night to carry everything the rest of the way. And as awareness itself grows quieter and less distinct, the story continues softly in the background, remaining even as listening slowly drifts away, moving gently toward a place where awareness itself can begin to fade. The mind doesn't seem as present as it was before. Not gone, just less anchored. Awareness feels lighter now, as if it no longer needs to stay in one place. It drifts easily, without intention, without needing to decide where to go next. Thoughts still exist somewhere, but they arrive quietly, often passing through before they're noticed. A hint of an idea, a trace of a feeling, then nothing at all. There's no effort involved in letting them go. They simply don't stay long enough to matter. This drifting feels natural, almost familiar. Attention no longer settles firmly on anything. It moves gently instead, floating from one sensation to another, sometimes resting briefly, sometimes slipping past without stopping. There's no need to follow its movement. It knows where to go on its own. The body remains still and heavy, fully supported. There's no urge to adjust or check how it feels. Sensations blend together, becoming less distinct, less demanding. Comfort no longer requires awareness. Breathing continues softly, barely noticeable now. The rhythm remains steady, but it no longer draws attention. It's simply there, happening on its own. Like everything else, the room stays quiet and unchanged. Darkness holds steady. Shadows remain where they were, no longer registering as separate shapes. Everything outside the mind feels distant, as though it exists somewhere else entirely. The story continues, but it feels farther away now. Words arrive gently, sometimes registering only as sound, sometimes not at all. Meaning fades into rhythm. Listening becomes something that happens in the background, without effort. You don't need to keep track. The mind wanders freely, no longer guided by thought or intention. It drifts the way it always does, when there's nothing left to hold on to. There's no destination. There's no expectation of arriving anywhere. This wandering feels safe. Time becomes difficult to sense. Moments stretch and overlap. There's no clear separation between one instant and the next. The night unfolds without markers, without change that needs to be noticed. That thoughts grow even rarer now. When one does appear, it feels distant, as though it's happening far away. It dissolves before becoming clear, leaving behind only a faint impression that quickly fades. Awareness itself begins to blur. There's less distinction between listening and not listening, between being aware and simply resting. The edges soften further, making it hard to tell where one state ends and another begins. The night seems to carry everything now, including awareness. You don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to guide it. It drifts comfortably on its own. The body remains deeply at rest. Weight feels evenly distributed, supported without effort. Muscles stay loose, unmoving. There's no signal to adjust or respond. Even the idea of staying awake feels distant. Silence fills the spaces easily. It no longer feels like something between thoughts. It feels like the natural state, steady and complete. Thoughts, when they appear, feel like brief interruptions rather than the main event. The story remains present, but far away, like a familiar sound heard from another room. You don't need to follow it. It continues whether you're aware of it or not. Awareness drifts further now, slipping in and out gently. There may be moments when it fades entirely, returning briefly without announcement. These shifts feel unimportant, barely noticed. The mind doesn't comment on them. There's no sense of effort or intention left. Everything happens quietly, automatically. Rest deepens without drawing attention to itself. Thoughts no longer form clearly enough to follow. They appear as soft impressions, vague movements that dissolve almost immediately. There's no interest in holding on to them. The night deepens around this drifting, not darker, just quieter. Everything slows further, settling into a gentler rhythm. The body remains still. Breathing remains steady. Nothing changes, and nothing needs to. Awareness continues to loosen, floating freely, without anchor or direction. It moves the way it always has when sleep begins to approach, lightly and without resistance. Listening fades in importance. Words pass through unnoticed. Sound blends into silence. Presence becomes diffuse. There's no clear moment when anything shifts. Everything simply grows softer, slower, less defined. The mind no longer tries to make sense of what's happening. It doesn't need to. It rests comfortably in this wandering state, where nothing requires attention. Thoughts are now rare and fleeting. When they appear, they feel thin and distant, barely forming before dissolving again. They leave no trace behind. Awareness drifts further still. The night holds this gently, offering the same quiet support it has all along. There's no urgency, no expectation. Everything unfolds at its own pace. The story remains, but it feels increasingly remote. You may notice it occasionally, or not at all. Either way is fine. The mind wanders without noticing, slipping easily between awareness and rest. There's no need to hold on to the present moment. It will be there whether you attend to it or not. This drifting feels complete, settled. There's nowhere else to go, nothing else to do. And as awareness continues to wander freely, becoming lighter and less defined, it begins to feel natural to let even this gentle drifting fade, allowing the night to carry everything the rest of the way. And as awareness itself grows quieter and less distinct, the story continues softly in the background, remaining even as listening slowly drifts away.